Gentlemen, I read the Odyssey and it changed my life. You know, when you make decisions, they say that the outcomes that you get in life are only as good as the decisions that you make. Now, there is some truth to that, but you also have to consider that it's a two-part equation. The decisions that you make and how the universe responds to those decisions. For instance, you can make the decision to go out on a run. You can't make the decision of whether or not someone hits you with their car, right? It's a bit of a dark analogy, but it can happen. One of the best decisions you can make, in my view, is reading classics, the foundational texts of Western civilization, texts that have been around for thousands of years, right? Some of them have been around for hundreds of years. If you want to read Renaissance literature, you want to read, you know, stuff from medieval Europe, you want to read Shakespeare, Milton. However, when you look at a work like the Odyssey, like the Iliad, which was written by Homer nearly 3,000 years ago, the fact that more people don't read this it blows my mind, right? It is one of the foundational texts of Western civilization, and it's the ultimate coming home story. So what did I learn by finishing the Odyssey? Well, the first one is one has to recognize this longing for home that everyone has. Everyone loves their home, right? Everyone loves, and home is where your family is. Home is where your people is, right? That's what nations are. That's what communities are. Nations are a group of people with a shared heritage, a shared history, a shared identity. Communities are a group of people who live in a certain area and they have a shared, sense of belonging to that particular area. Everyone has a longing for home, and that perhaps is the most profound underlying psychological setting of the story. Where do I even begin? There's like a million things on my mind. The first thing is the struggle of the return. Odysseus faces iconic rituals, right? You have the Cyclops, you have Polyphemus, you have the seductive song of the sirens, you have the sea monster Scylla. The trials and tribulations that he goes through just show you the will to power. Even 3,000 years ago, when I was reading the Odyssey, I just had to think to myself, this was written 3,000 years ago. And, the maxim, where there is a will, there will always be a way, comes to mind when reading this text from 3,000 years ago, that this man who was determined to get back to his home, to get back to his wife, managed to overcome such great and profound, challenges, trials and tribulations along the way in order to return. I'll talk more about that momentarily, but one of the other most profound themes of this book is the domestic front. Back in Ithaca, Odysseus's home has been occupied by suitors, and the suitors are depleting his wealth and they're pressuring his wife Penelope to marry them. Penelope, who's an icon, is fending off these suitors because she's waiting for her husband to come home. This is one of the most inspiring parts about the Odyssey. Now, it isn't the main focus of the Odyssey. The main focus is Odysseus and the trials and tribulations he's going through in order to return back home from Troy, right? And all the detours he goes along the way to eventually get back to Ithaca. Penelope is an icon. She is an icon of feminine virtue, loyalty to a man, dedication to a man, waiting for a man. It's truly inspiring. It really makes you think that men can do such incredible things when they know that their woman is at home waiting for them, and when they know that they have a beautiful, virtuous wife to return to, right? Penelope fends off suitors. She waits for her man. She doesn't allow any other man to have access to her during this time. And what a great representation of dignity, of honor, of, sexual restraint that is lacking in modern culture, to say the least, right? Do you really think, once again, this was written 3,000 years ago. Do you really think in ancient Greece, when the city-states went off to war, in ancient Rome, when ancient Rome was expanding its border, if the average Roman soldier or Greek soldier thought that his wife was cheating on him, this is without smartphones back in the day, this is no sort of, there's not even a postal service, there's no mechanism of communication. If the average Greek or Roman soldier thought that his wife was cheating on him, he'd go off to war? No, he wouldn't. He would sit at home and he'd guard his woman because he wants to ensure paternity. He wants to ensure that his kids are actually his, and if another man has access to her in that way, there's a risk of paternity fraud and cuckoldry. So he just wouldn't go. And when you have stories like Penelope that showcase that a man can go off to Troy in the case of Odysseus, and even if he gets lost on his way back home, Penelope remains virtuous and faithful. That is one of the most inspiring parts of the story by far. There are individual parts of the story that you can draw such profound lessons from. When Odysseus passes the sirens, they call out to him, as they do to everyone. So he has his crewmen, before having his crewmen block off their ears, he has them tie him to the mast of their ship, right? They tie Odysseus there. And the goal is Odysseus is going to hear their calls and he's going to resist them while his crewmen cover their ears, right? And because he's tied to the mast, he can't change course. He can't go to them. So the ship sails, it goes past the sirens, and Odysseus is tied to the mast. And even though he's getting enchanted by their songs, he's feeling the allure. Because he's physically restrained, he can't go anywhere, and the ship goes on through and it passes by the sirens. And Odysseus overcomes temptation. Now, Odysseus did not know this, but the sirens were fated to die should a sailor ever resist their call. And once again, this is the will to power. This is Odysseus overcoming temptation because he has a mission. His mission is to get back home. His mission is not to succumb to lust or to, momentary hedonistic pleasures. His mission is to get back home. That was a profound lesson in the story as well. Odysseus begins the journey as a proud, boastful warrior, right, from Troy. And he ends it as a weary, patient man who needs to disguise himself as a beggar in order to return back home. Now, in the modern world, men can often struggle to balance their competitiveness, their aggressiveness, which might be manifested in sports and gaming, and to transform from that into a relational and builder mode where you go, towards being the provider of a family, to being a structured family man. It is a transition that a man has to make. And Odysseus he undergoes this transition. This is not a very obvious lesson, but Odysseus learns that brute force, which is what worked in Troy and what worked in the Trojan War, isn't enough to get him home. He has to learn cunning, right? I believe the Greek word is metis, M-E-T-I-S, and he has to learn wisdom, he has to learn cunning, he has to learn restraint. It's all these skills that he has to accumulate, which young men have to accumulate as well, right? There's a reason why coming of age rituals used to exist in society. Young men had to accumulate these skill sets, which of restraint, of cunning, of wisdom, of acting with the future in mind, i.e. delayed gratification. Odysseus realizes the same thing. The same brute force that helped him win the Trojan War isn't going to help him return back home to his wife Penelope, right? So it's a story about maturing. It's a story about learning. It's a story about, think of it this way. If you have a destination that you want to get to, if you have a goal that you want to get to, the reason you're not at that goal is because you're not the man that you need to be in order to achieve the goal that you want, right? Odysseus had a goal to get back home to his wife. Now, yes, he didn't know that he was going to be sent astray a million different ways, but he got home to his wife because he adapted and he built all these new skill sets that he didn't have before. That is another profound, lesson in the book. There's Telemachus, Odysseus' son, who feels powerless against the suitors that are trying to get engaged to his mother. His journey is about finding his voice and standing up for his homeland, which is a profound, profound story in and of itself. There's so many other symbolic items in the story, right? I could not do it justice in a 10-minute YouTube video, but the lotus eaters, they live in a state of perpetual comfort. They're a perfect metaphor for modern distractions, right? A huge proportion of the population, and this is not to sound holier than thou, this is the truth, a huge proportion of the modern population are lotus eaters. They live in a state of perpetual comfort. They avoid any form of, discomfort that may actually be better for them in the long run. Odysseus constantly pays the price for his pride as well, right? His hubris. The story teaches one a lot about hubris as well. When he mocks the Cyclops, he brings upon himself a curse that lasts a decade, right? It's a very profound lesson. If for those of you that don't know, or you probably do know, but if you're watching this video, he tells the Cyclops his name. And even though the Cyclops is blinded, the Cyclops now knows who he is. And so the Cyclops, I believe Poseidon is his father. Poseidon curses Odysseus, and Odysseus' ship has a very bad time in the seas because Poseidon is the god of the seas. And if he hadn't done that, if he hadn't exposed his identity, he could have gotten home to his wife faster. So it teaches you a lot about hubris as well. I'm going to end the video there. In the modern day, if you're in university, a lot of the universities in the West, right, a lot of the universities in Canada, in the United States, they refuse to teach the foundational texts of Western civilization. They refuse to teach the Odyssey, the Iliad, or if they do, it's from some modernist, feminist, quasi like woke perspective. And you don't just get to read the text for what it is. And I'm very glad that I got to do that in my own time. And it's something that I recommend to all of you. The Odyssey is a great way to supplement your education with a real education, if that makes sense. So you should all read The Odyssey. Reading it was one of the best decisions I've made in the past month or two. You should read it as well.